is The Morning Press, a BrainIron.com production. Here's 11 minutes or so of news for today, Friday, February 9th, 2024. The Federal Communications Commission on Thursday banned the use of AI-generated voices in robocalls, a ruling that aims to prevent the further rise of the use of faked celebrities and politicians' voices in attempts to defraud or persuade the public. The FCC issued the new rule on the basis of legislation from 1991, the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, a law that restricted junk calls with pre-recorded messages on the other end. The 1991 law banned, quote, any telephone call to any residential telephone line using an artificial or pre-recorded voice to deliver a message without the prior express consent of the called party, end quote. And the agency determined that AI-generated voices fall perfectly well within that purview. The ruling comes after voters in New Hampshire last month received calls from an AI-faked Joe Biden that encouraged them not to vote in the state's then upcoming primary election. From the FCC's commentary about the new rules, quote, although voice cloning and other uses of AI on calls are still evolving, we have already seen their use in ways that can uniquely harm consumers and those whose voice is cloned. Voice cloning can convince a called party that a trusted person or someone they care about, such as a family member, wants or needs them to take some action that they would not otherwise take. End quote. A brief editorial aside. This is a perfectly sensible new rule, and it's convenient that the language of the old law allows the FCC to simply extend its authority, essentially by fiat. It's an example of the administrative state doing something good with its broad mandate, and I can't really imagine anyone complaining about it. A few years ago, I got an unusual call from my elderly grandmother asking if I was okay. Sure, I lied. How are you, Grandma? She explained that she'd just gotten off the phone with someone claiming to be her eldest grandson, that he had been in an accident and through some convoluted series of events was both moderately injured and being arrested, and needed help getting bailed out if she would just read him a bank or credit card number. Let me get my purse and call you right back, she'd said, hanging up, and then proceeded to call me to make sure that I was okay. The other guy hadn't sounded like me at all, she said, never mind the obvious dead giveaway that he was actually calling his grandmother. Both relieved and guilty, I gave her an attaboy for not getting scammed and went back to wondering about the awful depths to which my fellow man will sink in pursuit of a few dollars more, now with a novel disturbing low to contemplate. This new rule won't prevent people from getting scammed, but it does open the door for civil and criminal prosecution of the next generation of scammers who might, for example, use an AI voice cloner to make trusted voices say things to vulnerable people in an attempt to relieve them of their property. But the new rule is something of a silver lining around a dark rain cloud. The FCC was able to act in this case because an old law's language so neatly lines up with their aims of today, even as the technology has transformed in ways we couldn't have imagined in 1991. The inability or unwillingness of Congress to act on any number of pressing issues, they passed fewer than 30 laws last year, only reinforces a valid criticism that many people have of the bureaucratic or administrative state. That federal agencies have too much leeway to determine the scope of their own authority, write their own rules, and determine who is and who is not an offender. There are currently 3 cases before the Supreme Court that address this very issue, and the 6-3 conservative lean of the court points toward an eventual reining in of federal agencies' authority to fill in the gaps where legislation is lacking or ambiguous.
The point is that federal agencies are soon to be handcuffed in their ability to address the problems of our quickly shifting modern world.
And Congress remains largely incapable of passing anything but continuing budget resolutions and debt limit raises.
Who will be left to do the actual work of government?
I don't think we're ready to leave it to the robots just yet.
Vice President Kamala Harris on Friday pushed back on special counsel Robert Hur's report about President Joe Biden's mishandling of classified materials, calling the report's language about Biden's memory, which was described as hazy, fuzzy, faulty, poor, and significantly limited at various points, politically motivated, and gratuitous. A brief editorial aside, there has been much made in the media these last 24 hours about the special counsel's report, which does not recommend criminal prosecution, but did find wrongdoing, most of which has of course centered around Biden's mental acuity. As one example, 70-years-old Paul Krugman blogged at the New York Times about, quote, the disgusting furor over Biden's age, end quote, in which he discussed his own faulty memory, described an hour-long meeting with a very lucid Biden in August, and offered, as supporting evidence for his claim that Biden is fine, actually, a story about his own now-deceased father, who would, towards the end of his life, appear totally lucid in the daytime before becoming incoherent and angry at night, which is obviously a weird thing to admit right after saying he spent one whole hour in cogent conversation with Biden this summer. Krugman also pointed out, in keeping with a lot of the other commentary, that Donald Trump probably isn't any better, which is perfectly fair, but also kind of weird. Are we supposed to take comfort in the possibility that both men, who might be the leader of the free world for the next 5 years, are sundowning and constantly in danger of losing their grasp of time and place? Krugman concludes with the following, quote, so to everyone who's piling on Biden right now, stop and look in the mirror and ask yourself what you are doing, end quote. I have taken a further brief aside to do just that, and concluded that it remains perfectly reasonable to wonder about such things. To wit, all of the hand-wringing about media coverage of the age question and various talking or tweeting heads insisting that Biden is fine or Trump is worse or the other way around misses the only thing that matters. People will decide this one entirely on their own. It takes just a few seconds of listening to someone talk to reach your own conclusions about such matters, and all the super plugged-in weirdos concerned about what effect media chatter about the subject will have on voters' perception once again elevates the influence of media chatter above all else. When Biden or Trump is on their television or other screens, the people will render their own subjective judgment, and nothing anyone says is going to change their minds. Paul Krugman admonishing his fellow media types for daring to express an opinion that he worries will sway the average idiot to believe something that isn't true about his preferred candidate is a denial of the average idiot's ability to discern one of the most easily discernible questions of human interaction, whether the lights are on and whether anybody's home. The hand-wringing about the age discourse is revelatory not of the media's penchant for defaulting to covering politics as a horse race, but of their utter contempt for the rest of us, the dopes sitting at home, who can't be trusted with anything at all. In briefer political news, the race to fill the expelled George Santos's New York's 3rd Congressional District House seat is a toss-up, with a poll released showing the contest within the margin of error and 7% of voters still undecided ahead of Tuesday's vote. Former Maryland governor, popular anti-Trump Republican Larry Hogan, is expected to enter the race to become a senator in his state, giving the GOP a realistic shot of picking up what has reliably been a Democratic stronghold. A Republican hasn't won election to the Senate from Maryland since 1980. And Donald Trump won the largely uncontested Nevada state caucuses on Thursday and will be awarded all 26 of the state's delegates, giving him a better than 3.5-to-1 lead over Nikki Haley heading into the South Carolina primary in 2 weeks. Now, here's a look at the weather. The video doorbell company Ring is raising the price of its cheapest subscription plan to $5 per month or $50 per year. That's a cool $50 or $60 a year to get the most out of the doorbell camera you installed on your door after spending that much on it to begin with. There is no shortage of things that people have subscriptions for these days that would have been mostly unthinkable not all that long ago. But it seems to me that the doorbell has to be among the most surprising of them. I'm sure people love their video doorbells, and I'm sure I'd get at least a temporary kick out of one if, for whatever reason, I ever end up having one. But I hope I never do. What are we doing paying a monthly subscription to a company to keep a permanent record of the comings and goings from outside our front door? Whose brain benefits from a push notification interrupting whatever one is up to with a 10-second clip of the mailman? Why do we feel compelled to know, with absolute certainty, something that was previously not even a mystery to us, something we mostly hadn't bothered to contemplate, simply because it didn't matter? It's just another few seconds a day, just another few moments, sure. But what once belonged to you, those unoccupied regions of your old life in which you simply existed, permitted to let your attention go where it may, or focus, or simply float freely in the nothing, those moments that didn't belong to anyone or anything else, you're now paying to have them interrupted. We have been colonized, not just by the doorbell apps, but by the whole attention economy, and for some reason, we are paying for the privilege. I say this as someone who, 11 minutes or so ago, interrupted whatever it was you were up to with perhaps an email or a push notification requesting a few minutes of your attention and either getting it or receiving the thumbed-away dismissal. I say this as a hypocrite, I mean. So, sorry. But I do wonder what the attention colonizers will demand $50 a year for next, and how many times a day will that grant them the ability to reach out across a wire and snap their fingers next to our ears, pulling us out of wherever we were, and demanding we spare a moment for them. What will be left of us when we have spent the currency of all our available moments, one subscription at a time, a consciousness filled with information that never needed to exist, information with no practical, nor artistic, nor spiritual, nor intellectual content, minds fully turned over to external forces that create in order only to fill previously unmarked territory, a creation meant to destroy, to annihilate the interstitial, the momentary, the quiet, the part of the self that can only flourish on its own, not in reaction to the world, but when separate from it. What will be left of us when we are all just visceral stimulus creatures, paying $50 a year to never have to contemplate the darkness again? That's the weather from here. How's it look out your window? The Morning Press is a production of the BrainIron.com multinational media empire. Please direct comments and complaints to brainironpodcast@gmail.com. For a transcript of today's episode and links to the stories referenced, find The Morning Press at brainiron.substack.com, where, if you would like to support this and the other podcasting and blogging endeavors of the BrainIron.com media empire, you can also become a paying subscriber. If you can think of anyone else who might enjoy whatever it is we're up to around here, please consider sharing. Thanks, and barring the sudden onset of the inevitable, we'll talk to you next week.
The proceeding was created with 100% human content.
I don't think we're ready to leave it to the robots just yet.